Hey, y'all, welcome to Joko Yo. Something really remarkable happened in the last few days. Depending on whenever you listen to this, as of right now, it's the 21st of March of 2026, and it seemed to happen yesterday. The absolute unthinkable. Chuck Norris died. And if you're Gen X like myself, that is not possible. There's a Chuck Norris joke so old that it has probably been on a coffee mug. You know the ones like Chuck Norris doesn't do push ups, he pushes the earth down. Death once had a near Chuck Norris experience. I saw one today that said that Chuck Norris has been in every single Star Wars movie. He was the Force. They've been circulating on the internet since probably about 2005 when someone discovered that roundhouse kicks and deadpan exaggeration are a reliable formula for moderate amusement. Here is one that's not a joke. There was someone, a person besides Death, which I don't think really Death beat Chuck Norris. I think Death just let him go. But there was one person, a human, who actually did beat Chuck Norris. And his name was Joe Louis. And he grew up on a farm in Knightdale, North Carolina, right on the Johnston County line. Close enough that his story belongs to this stretch of road and this particular red soil as much as it belongs anywhere. He enlisted in the Marines at 18, went to Vietnam, ended up in Okinawa, and discovered karate. He had never thrown a karate kick in his life. Boy was from Knightdale. 7 months later, he had his black belt. 22 months after his first karate class, he walked into his first tournament, the U.S. National Karate Championships in Washington, D.C., and won it. He won everything, and he kept winning everything for the next decade. And if you know anything about the Karate Kid franchise, the real bad teacher, the guy that was the really mean guy for the Cobra Kai was, I mean, not the demeanor, obviously, but the going to Vietnam, Okinawa, and everything, that was modeled after this guy, Joe Louis. This guy trained under Bruce Lee. He sold Chuck Norris his karate studio. He was voted the greatest karate fighter of all time, not once but twice, by polls of the world's top fighters. Chuck Norris voted for him. Bruce Lee called him the greatest. And he is buried at Knightdale Baptist Church Cemetery, 12 miles from the Johnston County line, the same community where he grew up rolling in the dirt with his brothers on his father's farm. Y'all, this is the story of Joe Louis, who is the most dangerous man in America, who came from right next door and is the one man who beat Chuck Norris. Joe Louis was born on March 7, 1944 in Knightdale. His father was improbably both a farmer and a professor at North Carolina State University, a combination that suggests a man of considerable range, and his mother taught high school. There are 5 Louis boys, and by all accounts, they were not a quiet household. The family had been living in Raleigh, but the 5 brothers ran so wild that their father eventually made a decision familiar to parents throughout recorded history. They needed more space, and other people needed more distance from them. He moved the family out to the farm in Knightdale when Joe was about 10 years old. Steve Wilder, who grew up with the Louis boys, remembered them very simply. They were mean and wild as hell. Joe Louis worked that farm until the day he enlisted in the Marines in 1962 at age 18. He went to Vietnam with the 8th Marine Brigade, one of the first American combat units deployed, and then transferred to Okinawa. He was not looking for karate. He was lifting weights and thinking about professional wrestling, actually. Then he saw the black belts training in the same gymnasium, and something about the way they moved caught his attention in a way that wrestling had not. He asked to study. He was told it would take 2 to 3 years to earn a black belt, and he earned it in 7 months. His instructors, Aizo Shimabuku, John Korab, Kinjo Kensoku, apparently recognized that they were not dealing with an ordinary student, neither did anyone else who encountered him after that. On May 7, 1966, a young man in a black Okinawan gi walked into Chun-Ri's third National Karate Championships in Washington, D.C. He had been out of the Marines for less than a year. He had 22 months of karate training. He was not familiar with tournament rules. And there were 549 competitors. He won. He not just won, he won both the fighting and the kata divisions, won match after match using as single weapon his sidekick. The referee asked him at some point during the tournament why he only used a sidekick. Joe Louis's answer was simple: because they can't block it. He won the U.S. National Championships in 1966, 67, 68, and 69, 4 consecutive years. He was voted America's top tournament fighter in Black Belt Magazine's first ever national rankings in April of 1967. He won the World Professional Heavyweight Karate Championship in November of 1968 at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City, for which he was paid $600. Relative to the prestige involved, was an extraordinary underpayment. He won over 30 major titles in a tournament career that lasted less than a decade. No one has matched it since. And it was during this run that he also beat Chuck Norris. Not just once, but regularly. Chuck Norris was himself a formidable fighter, multiple-time national champion, future movie star. I mean, he's going to be Walker, Texas Ranger, the man whose name would eventually become synonymous with in American popular culture with the idea of physical invincibility. He scared death. Joe Louis beat him anyway, multiple times. In 1983, Karate Illustrated surveyed the world's 23 greatest tournament fighters and asked them to vote on the greatest of all time. Chuck Norris voted for Joe Louis. Chuck Norris said he was the best fighter he'd ever seen. Bill Wallace voted for Joe Louis. They tied for second place behind the man they were voting for. The kid from the Knightdale farm was the consensus best fighter in the world, and he was really just getting started. In 1968, Joe Louis began training with Bruce Lee. Now, this requires a moment of context because Bruce Lee in 1968 was not yet the global icon he became after his death in 1973. He was the martial arts instructor and a minor television actor. He had played a role in The Green Hornet, which had run one season, collecting about $15,000 a year in residuals and charging $50 an hour for private lessons to clients like Steve McQueen and James Coburn. He was working on a theory he called Jeet Kune Do. I think I pronounced that right. The way of the intercepting fist, which held that rigid style-based training was a limitation, that the best fighter was one who could absorb and discard techniques from any source and respond fluidly to whatever was in front of him. Joe Louis was exactly the kind of fighter that Bruce Lee's theory was built for. They trained together, just the two of them, weekly. Louis would drive to Bruce's house. Bruce was, by his own account, a terrible driver, so Joe always drove, and they would work. Bruce coached, Joe fought. Good strong positioning, being able to bridge the gap fast, being explosive off the initial move, and mobility. Louis described years later when asked what Lee had taught him. He said, "That's what I got from Bruce." The results were visible immediately. Louis won 11 consecutive tournaments after he started working with Lee, and nobody could touch him. Now, here's the detail that belongs in this episode specifically. Bruce Lee was considering opening a chain of commercial karate schools in 1968. Chuck Norris and Chun-Ri were already making significant money on the chain school model. I'm getting like echoes of Cobra Kai. And Lee was thinking about what that could mean for him and his family. One of the schools he was looking at acquiring was a karate studio in Los Angeles that was owned and operated by Joe Louis. The same Joe Louis who had been training with him. Lee eventually chose his acting career over the school business, and so Joe Louis sold that Los Angeles studio directly to the other guy, Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris built his career on the foundation of a karate studio that he bought from the farm kid in Knightdale. That's a documented fact. This is not a Chuck Norris joke. It's just what happened. Now, after his tournament career, Lewis invented a brand new sport. I mean, who is this guy? In 1970, he became the United States heavyweight kickboxing champion. Full contact, no point fighting, you win by knocking the other person down or out. And defended his title 7 times without anyone surviving the second round. He was the first fighter to bring the power of boxing into the precision of karate, and the sport he built from that combination eventually became kickboxing, which eventually became mixed martial arts, which is now a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Joe Louis from Knightdale, y'all, is the grandfather of the UFC. This is not an exaggeration. Historians of combat sports trace a direct line from Lewis's innovations in the early 1970s to every single MMA event that has ever been televised. He went to Hollywood to star in films. He was in a movie called Jaguar Lives, Force 5. He appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Dinah Shore. He was inducted into more than a dozen halls of fame. In 1983, he was voted the greatest karate fighter of all time by his peers. In 1985, American Karate Magazine called him a living legend. Black Belt Magazine named him Instructor of the Year 2000. He spent the last years of his competitive career back in the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington in the late 80s, teaching seminars, training young fighters. In the 1990s, he settled in a pattern of traveling the country teaching, then returning to North Carolina. Dr. Jerry Beasley, the martial arts historian at Radford University, who became one of Lewis's closest colleagues, sought him out specifically because Lewis had relocated to the Knightdale area. The greatest karate fighter in American history, ain't Chuck Norris, he had come home. Beasley drove down, called Lewis on the phone, told him that he wanted to train. They sparred, Lewis knocked him down, then they became lifelong colleagues. In July of 2011, Joe Louis was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. Doctors gave him 6 to 8 weeks. He lasted 13 months, of course he did. He died on August 31st, 2012 at a veterans hospital in Coatesville, Pennsylvania at 68 years old. He was buried at Knightdale Baptist Church Cemetery in Knightdale, Wake County, North Carolina, in a community where he had rolled in the dirt with his brothers on the Johnston County line. Now, on the death of Chuck Norris, and knowing that Joe Louis has also passed, I don't know where your spiritual mind and heart is, but I cannot imagine that there would be a place that could hold them both. I mean, if Chuck Norris, there's one Chuck Norris the internet has mostly missed. It's a shame because it's the truest one. It goes like this. One person who could beat Chuck Norris grew up in Knightdale, North Carolina. I mean, if you ever find yourself on US 64 heading out of Raleigh, past the county line, you are driving through the territory that made Joe Louis. The same road that used to be Green's Path, the same red clay soil, the same flat farmland under a big sky that has been producing people who were tougher than they look for as long as anybody has been keeping track. Y'all, Joe Louis was tougher than anyone, even Chuck Norris. He just happened to be from here. And y'all, that's Joko Yo. Good day.